This is an origin story, an abridged origin story, so don't run away just yet. Now, much like how we learned how Wolverine endured the pain and experience to earn his strengths, his powers, his claws, I too have endured a life of experience, setbacks, and successes that have mutated me into my very own version of a comic book character. Do I have claws that extend and retract? Actually, yes. Do I heal quickly? Rather, in fact. And do I look for opportunities to help others who at this moment in time need assistance and guidance? 100%. I've conveyed it already in the last episode, but you should all be working to bring your inner mutations out. While the experience may feel like shit in the moment, it's your only path to metamorphosis, unlocking whatever crazy strengths you have living deep inside and becoming the greatest version of yourself. If you're still with me, you're likely thinking to yourself, this delusional asshole actually thinks he's Wolverine. And you may not be that far off from the truth. Let's take a walk. Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of Eyes Wide, the podcast. Thank you to everyone who listened to my first official episode, Believe. If you haven't listened, please check out Believe and then subscribe so you don't miss future episodes as they drop. Now, I received much more feedback from the first episode than I would have imagined, and I'm happy to say it wasn't all bad. One of the areas people said I was lacking was in allowing the audience to get to know me and have a better understanding of where my insight comes from and why it should matter to those listening. And the truth is, I'm not sure my insight does matter, and that's not intended to be self-deprecating. I just don't think that's for me to decide. And over time and through experience, I have developed an approach to life and business that suits the successes and the outcomes I'm seeking. And I'll be the first to tell you, my approach is not for everyone. But that said, sharing examples of my experiences and setbacks, my origin story, will allow you a better understanding into why I speak, act, and live the way I do. Now, the truth is, I was never much of a comic book guy. However, I do adore the comic book movies. Now, for those of you who may not know, there is a common thread and theme that connects virtually every superhero story out there. That common thread is significant trauma, pain, and/or negative experience that transforms the protagonist, and in some cases the antagonist, from normal and relatively weak to extraordinary with superhuman strengths and/or abilities. Now, some of you out there are going to truly understand and be able to sympathize and relate with what I'm about to discuss. I was a late bloomer, a little dude. My birthday is in September, so I was already going to be one of the smaller ones in the class. And this was well before all of the parents out there started giving their kids the gift of time. So I didn't have much of a chance. For those of you familiar with Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, you're well aware of his theories regarding the top athletes on the hockey team being those born in January and February. Not only was I not going to be the star of the hockey team, I was going to have to work harder than most just to make the team. Now, when we were kids, there wasn't that much separation, and I was probably considered one of the more athletic kids on the field, especially when it came to baseball. But fast forward to high school, and I was quickly becoming a boy playing among men. And to give you some context into how small I was, I decided to wrestle my sophomore year of high school because I wanted to get involved with something that would force me to have discipline with diet, exercise, and weightlifting. I also wanted to test myself against people that were of the same size and weight, as I was getting frustrated with my abilities to take on people who were significantly bigger than I was. And those people that were the same size as me, well, they were also going to need to weigh in at a whopping 103 pounds as well. Now, here's what I learned. For the first time in my life, I realized that I was in control of me. I learned that all of my actions, my training, my diet, my preparation was all up to me. If I didn't practice and prepare, I got beat. If I trained hard, knew my opponent, and I had the right mindset going into the match, I was able to dominate. At 103 pounds, it was by far the most powerful I have ever felt. And I want you to let that sink in for a minute. Because true power is not about how strong you are or how much weight you can move. True power is reflected in what you are able to control. I was beginning to understand how individuals work and string actions together to create successful outcomes, not by luck, not by default, but by the sheer will to outperform yourself again and again and again. I was learning how to crack the code. Now, outside of the wrestling room, I also needed to figure out how to make my presence bigger than my physical stature. I didn't want to be invisible. I wanted people to notice my existence, so I knew I needed to stand out with my communication and my academics. Now, most of my classes in high school were with the class ahead of me. So if I was already considered small compared to my classmates, think about what that experience was like. I walked a very fine line with others, running my mouth and speaking loudly enough to catch the attention of others, but knowing how to diffuse situations when they're about to turn for the worse. Sure, I came close to a few beatings, but it never happened. And walking that line would prove to be much more valuable to my future development than accepting invisibility. The close calls allowed me to find my edges and also the edges of others. When you speak, how you speak, endless combinations of language that will elicit all sorts of reactions from those you are speaking to. And I became absolutely addicted to the reactions of others. I became very quick in biting with my words. Old enough to know how to deliver these words, but not yet mature enough to understand the concepts of consequences of going too far with these biting words. I was also old enough to understand that I was an underdog, and I would need to fight for everything I won or achieved. Nothing was going to happen easily. Now, staying in the Malcolm Gladwell vein, it wasn't until after I read David and Goliath, one of my all-time favorites, by the way, that I began to understand the gifts I was given early in life. Even though those gifts at the time felt like I was getting seriously shafted. Looked over by girls, bullied by jocks, prevented from participating in the sports and the activities that I loved. The world was dealing me a really tough hand of cards, and I didn't have a ton of outs. But the whole point of David and Goliath is the idea that being the underdog often leads to unexpected strengths. Gladwell argues that disadvantages can force individuals to develop skills or perspectives that ultimately give them a competitive edge. This is when you start to develop your claws. By the time I was 16 years old, I was fully reliant on wit, intelligence, and intention to accomplish the goals I set for myself. Everything earned, nothing given, and it has taught me to be resilient and steadfast with my approaches to life. Now, fast forward. By the time I graduated college, I was finally over 6 feet tall, 190 pounds, and blessed with looks from my beautiful and youthful mother. Now, regardless of the way I now presented, the traits and discipline I developed while attempting to be bigger than I was had become part of my being, my nature. And even with my physical attributes finally catching up, there was still a chip placed firmly on my shoulder that would have no chance of ever being removed. What I was able to create just by committing to being noticeable would set me up for a life of underestimation and these unrelenting feelings that I could always accomplish more than others believed I could. At first meeting, people think they know me, know my type. One of those people who have been given everything, never had to work hard, and likely unimaginative with a low IQ. They couldn't be more wrong. In trying to land my first job out of college, I was resolute that I wanted to be a pharmaceutical sales rep, and I wasn't having anyone tell me differently. I remember being told by a recruiter that I would have no shot in landing a pharma sales job without selling something else first, like copiers or whatever the fuck else they were talking about at that time that you needed to have experience working for enterprise car rentals. And she wouldn't even grant me an interview with the company she was representing. So I found out her offices were about an hour away from where I lived in Long Island. I threw on the suit my dad bought me as a graduation gift, and I decided to camp out in her office until I was given an opportunity for a face-to-face meeting. There was no video chat at this time. I'll just go ahead and date myself. But I'll never forget her. Susan was her name, and she could not believe I showed up to her office unannounced, even after she told me I had no chance and wasn't going to send me along to an interview. She wanted to continue to be pissed, but I told her my dad wouldn't let me sleep in the house if I couldn't at least get an interview scheduled. Now, I went on to say my parents wanted me to be a doctor, and I convinced my parents that this path was the next best thing, becoming a pharmaceutical rep. So I had to get started on this journey as soon as possible. She told me to be back at her offices next week. The company was already on their second round of interviews, and leadership was coming into town to help make their decision. Now, on the day of the interview, I met with my would-be direct manager, and I could tell he liked me. I let him know I understood there would be many more experienced individuals when it came to being a pharmaceutical sales rep, but not more people experienced with standing out from a crowd. And from what I understood about the job of being a pharma rep was that you needed to separate yourself from the masses. You needed to be able to stand out, to rise above the noise. And I gave examples of standing out at a school with 40,000 students and grabbing the attention of various faculty to ensure they would recommend me to future employers. Forget just knowing who I was, but to know my name and be willing to write me a letter of recommendation. He agreed to send me along to his boss, but told me it would be a long shot. Now, my second interview of the day was in a boardroom with the hiring manager, his boss, and the director of marketing. They came down from Boston to help make a final decision. And it was clear my boss's boss wasn't believing I was the guy and was very dismissive with my answers to his questions. Even as a novice to the interview game, I knew I was tanking. I decided to stand up and I asked the interviewer if he'd be willing to try something. He shockingly agreed. I asked him to take a walk around the big table in the boardroom. If I could convince him that I was the guy for the job before he made his way around the table, would he offer me the job? He agreed. And before he was halfway around, I asked the question, tell me why you believe that 6 months from now, I won't be one of the more effective reps in the entire organization. You see, when you have nothing to lose, you have so much opportunity to win. As soon as I saw the smile on everyone's face, I knew I had the job, and I was perfectly fine with the monster target I just put on my back. Never be afraid to stand out from a crowd. Now, over the years, I have had the opportunity to be a part of some incredible companies in the med tech sector. I started small, privately held pharmaceutical company, moved into the bigs, both top 5 in the pharmaceutical and medical device industries, and then came back around to the smalls as it seemed that's where my skill set seemed to shine a little bit brighter. You see, when you're working for the bigs, there isn't a whole lot you can do to set yourself apart. And more often than not, when you're separating yourself, it tends to be for things that aren't looked upon 100% favorably. Simply put, the bigs are interested in your abilities to carry out the processes and plans created by others who are typically operating under the heading of do no harm. Conversely, the smalls are looking for those who can help create processes and plans and be part of a business discovery and then have the ability to effect changes in behavior. Now, I had grown tired of being told to fall in line, to think less, and to behave more. I was thirsting for the opportunity to shake shit up. Now, getting in on the ground floor with a pre-approval startup medical device company both saved and almost ended my life. Prior to, I was spiraling pretty fast and heavy, unsure of what it was I was supposed to become. Dabbling in a whole lot of other things, good and bad, to try and fill this professional void that had been created inside. Let me know if I'm striking a chord with any of you, because it's as we get into our late 20s and into our 30s and approaching our 40s that we ask ourselves all these hard questions. Am I doing what I am destined to do? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Am I doing what my skills and talents are intended to accomplish? So here's the thing about startup. Nobody is coming to save you. There is nowhere to hide. You will be snuffed out really fast and really hard. The person staring back at you in the mirror is your only source of strength, truth, and relentlessness. Now, here's the crazy thing. Today, the device that we were working tirelessly to bring to market is a wild success, improving the lives of patients inside and outside of the U.S. every single day. But when we were in the trenches of the unknown 13 years ago, surrounded by naysayers and haters outside and inside of the company, I never cared about how great the therapy was and will be one day. I believed from my first day of employment that my only job was to do my job, and that's not intended to be a riddle. I just believe that if I was able to succeed at my mission and then lead others to succeed at their missions, winning would be the only outcome available. Said differently, as long as I believed and everyone else around me believed, outsiders would be forced to believe as well, and there would only be one outcome. And it wasn't fucking easy. You better be okay with some roller coaster ups and downs. You better be okay with bosses telling you that you're shit, your strategy is shit, and people are betting on your failure. I won't have time for all the details in this episode describing the near fatalities of a small company. That is what the book is for. But the drama and inertia to close our doors for good was very intense and very real. From funding issues and failed data to board members' lack of belief, you not only need to continue developing and working to be the best, but those around you need to know how good you are. It needs to be felt, or it will all come to an end. It takes special people, steadfast leadership, and a super fucked up relentlessness and sense of self-worth to stare down the FDA, VCs, analysts, banks, Wall Street, and refuse to blink. Refuse to back down. Refuse to die. The days will own you, and you will never feel like you are gaining enough control to remain powerful in the face of continued opposition. And this is why it is so important to break your goals into manageable pieces. Because through the chaos of current days comes the clarity of comparative progression. I'm going to go ahead and say that again. Write it down if you need to. You ready? Because through the chaos of current days comes the clarity of comparative progression. It's also why the consistency of strategic execution is so vital when building something from the ground up, because nobody has ever done the specific thing that you are doing before. There is no recipe. There is no roadmap. There are no proverbial rabbits to hunt down, so you are lost until you are found. If you actually have experience building something and not just some guy or some girl that is now sitting in a seat at an office at a company created by someone else's grit and efforts, you understand exactly what I'm saying. And this is why the days like the day I was able to ring the closing bell at NASDAQ serve as validating core memories of success from sacrifice. I remember listening to our CEO deliver a speech prior to the bell, urging each of us to exhale, to reflect, to cherish. And it's like someone telling you to enjoy every day of college because these amazing years will be gone in a flash. But we never truly understand what that means until it's gone. Now, standing up on the stage as they counted down the time to the closing bell, I remember being insanely overcome with emotions. 10, 9. I just thought of my parents that sacrificed so much to ensure I was given every opportunity in this life to thrive. 8, 7. I thought of my wife and how difficult the years have been for her without me being there, forcing her to have to carry so much of the load with the raising of our 2 beautiful girls. 6, 5. And then I thought of my beautiful girls and how this day made the sacrifice of missing so many important pieces of their lives a little less saddening and a little less empty. But it still didn't replace that. 4, 3, 2. I thought of the guys in high school that would go out of their way to fuck with me, to make sure I was well aware that it didn't matter how well I did in school, how smart I thought I was, they would still own me. 1. Gratitude for it all. Every piece of it. As the confetti fell, the photographer snapped this amazing shot of me high-fiving our CEO. This was the top of the ride. And it's okay when you're at the top of the ride to acknowledge that you're at the top of the ride. Because if you're all the way done with the ride or you're on the way down and you don't understand when you're at the top, then you missed out. Know when you're at the top. It's okay. There will be other roller coasters. Now, interestingly enough, I happen to have a family vacation planned to Yellowstone for the day we were invited to New York for the ceremony. So instead of the Wyoming wilderness, the concrete jungle of Manhattan and Times Square are going to have to satisfy the desires for adventure. And I cannot tell you how upset my girls were to cancel our original trip. However, once they were able to see their faces on the side of a skyscraper in Times Square, all was forgiven. I was forgiven. There will be many more details and episodes and stories to come, but there is something I wanted to make sure gets conveyed in this episode. If any of you are still listening, and I hope you are, there is a line that is taken from the end of the movie Shawshank Redemption. If you haven't seen it, go see Shawshank Redemption. But I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast has watched Shawshank Redemption. But in this scene, Red is describing Andy's escape from prison. And the line is, Andy crawled to freedom through 500 yards of shit-smelling foulness I can't even imagine. Or maybe I just don't want to. For those of you who have seen, you can envision the scene in your head, and it has a visceral impact, depicting the sacrifice it sometimes takes to achieve something extraordinary. Next level achievement, greatness, wealth, success, it truly isn't for the faint of heart. And I'll tell you right now, not everyone can handle it. Most cannot. And I've seen some great ones fail, some individuals who thought they were good or great or talented or gifted, and they may have very well been all of those things, but all those things aren't going to amount to anything remarkable if you're not willing to sacrifice, if you're not willing to work for it, if you're not willing to crawl to freedom through 500 yards of shit-smelling foulness. These difficult times, stress, duress, pressure, failure, expectations, harsh criticism, these are the traumatic experiences that will trigger your inner mutations and bring out the power that is laying dormant inside. You won't know why you have these claws until you need these claws. This life is what you make of it. The future you is waiting patiently to meet the current you. Continue to work to find your tomorrow in today and keep the promises you make to yourself. Until we meet again, eyes wide, see everything. Goodbye.